wonderful news from Minerva Amasta. We all believe you're more than capable of handling this position. Provided you show your true abilities, Amasta, Sprout added, adjusting her patched, dusty hat with a smile. Even if you reveal only a fraction of your skill, it will certainly surpass that flamboyant show-off by far. Before him stood three respected professors, mentors in the truest sense. Amasta responded warmly with a smile and in a humble tone said, "Teaching is a vast and profound discipline. Possessing knowledge is one thing. Imparting it effectively to young witches and wizards is another entirely. Professors Flitwick and Sprout, I could never compare to the experience you both possess." Amasta's tactful praise delighted them. Flitwick glanced at Snape, who pretended not to be familiar with Amasta, and teased, "Severus is likely disappointed, isn't he? I've lost count of how many times he's failed to secure this position, and now he's bested by his own prized pupil. Perhaps Severus has grown accustomed to such defeats?" Sprout added with a sly remark, making even Amasta, who was nibbling on toast, laugh heartily. Severus Snape's face darkened, and he snorted. "Being the professor of this subject isn't anything to be proud of, Amasta. True skill lies in leaving the post safely." "You not being able to do it doesn't mean I can't, Professor," Amasta replied with a cheerful smile, making Snape's scowl deepen even further. After a relaxed and pleasant breakfast, they parted ways, agreeing to meet later for a drink at the Three Broomsticks. Instead of returning to his quarters, Amasta went to Professor McGonagall's office. The meeting was clearly prearranged, as she showed no surprise when he knocked and entered. "Oh, thank goodness, you've finally come," McGonagall said, lips pursed in mild complaint. Perhaps because the air of the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets hadn't caused any trouble and everything had proceeded smoothly, McGonagall seemed in better spirits and health than during the Christmas break. "In any case, Amasta, I must thank you. Some of the older students have long dreamed of becoming Aurors after graduation. You know that to be an Auror, at minimum, one must have 5 NE duties, including Defense Against the Dark Arts. If we kept following Gilderoy's teaching methods, these children would have faced shattered dreams long before they were ready." "I can only do my best, Professor McGonagall," Amasta replied with a wry smile. "But please, don't expect too much from me. You know I've never been especially good at exams, let alone helping young witches and wizards pass them, and if any clues about the chamber come up, those must take priority." "We've seen what you can do, Amasta," McGonagall said, lifting her chin slightly, a hint of displeasure in her tone. "I think you really need to work on that excessive modesty of yours. As for that chamber, well, that's beyond my control. Let Headmaster Dumbledore handle it. He could use something to occupy him properly." Amasta could only continue to smile wryly. "As for the division of work between you and Gilderoy, here's what I propose." When it came to work, McGonagall's demeanor became entirely serious. She spoke with authority. "The students who most urgently need your help are those in 5th and 7th year. They're about to face the most important exams of their lives. This will shape their futures. I hope you can coordinate with Gilderoy. He handles teaching for years below 5th, while you focus on 5th through 7th. Amasta remained thoughtful, silent. The arrangement made sense, but it conflicted with the real reason he had taken the post. If he couldn't reach the key members of the main student group, what was the point of all this effort? "Regarding this, Professor McGonagall, I think it's best if I discuss it first with Professor Lockhart," he said. In the end, he gave no definitive answer. After leaving McGonagall's office, Amasta hurried to see Lockhart. With a new week starting tomorrow, he needed to finalize matters that morning, then use the afternoon and evening to prepare. Even if his motives for taking the position weren't entirely pure, he was not one to idle and let his reputation fall to the level of Lockhart's. Speaking of Lockhart, Amasta couldn't help feeling perplexed. What teaching methods could possibly earn unanimous praise from every Hogwarts professor and the vast majority of students, even persuading McGonagall and Dumbledore to swallow their pride and ask him to come out of retirement? Apologies, everyone. This chapter is a bit short. These past 2 days have been hectic. I only got home at 11 p.m. and haven't even eaten yet, so here it is. Chapter 41, A Bit Guilty. Saturday morning, 10:30 a.m., Amasta stood before Professor Lockhart's office door, To be honest, he didn't feel much animosity toward the professor with a somewhat tarnished reputation. From their brief previous encounter, the professor had actually been fairly cordial in conversation, though it had to be said that his speaking style was undeniably flamboyant. In fact, Amasta felt a twinge of guilt toward Lockhart, for two reasons. The first was obvious. Here was a perfectly good defense against the dark arts professor, and he had unceremoniously swooped in and taken over half of Lockhart's role without so much as a warning. Put bluntly, that was nothing less than poaching someone's livelihood. Highly unethical. The second reason was a bit more complicated. A few nights ago, Amasta had used a certain method to forcibly transfer the curse the Dark Lord had placed on the position onto the voodoo doll. The advantage was clear. Amasta himself no longer had to bear the risks of the curse, and Lockhart, who would have originally faced all the consequences, also had his share of danger greatly reduced. On the surface, it seemed like a win-win situation, but it wasn't. For example, the Dark Lord's curse was like a raging river. Amasta's method of resisting it was akin to building a dam across the current. As long as the dam held, he stood safely behind it. But if the dam were ever to collapse, or if he chose to remove it himself, the water stored at such height would surge far more violently than before. Of course, if Lockhart were to resign and run off before Amasta, all the consequences would fall squarely on his shoulders. "Come in!" The voice behind the door was still cheerful, giving away nothing unusual. "Hope he's not too angry," Amasta muttered under his breath as he pushed the door open. Lockhart's office was as ostentatious as the man himself. Portraits of the professor adorned nearly every wall. Even on a bright morning, numerous blazing candles remained lit, their light reflecting off the pearly smiles in the portraits and nearly blinding Amasta. Another thing worth noting, among Hogwarts staff, only Lockhart's stack of letters waiting for reply rivaled that of Dumbledore himself, at least 5 feet high on his desk. "Oh, Miss Granger, didn't expect to see you here." Lockhart wasn't alone. Across from him, a young witch quickly rose from her chair, her face flushed, and hurriedly stuffed a golden card into her pocket. "Good morning, Mr. Breen." Amasta lingered at the doorway, raising an eyebrow and smiling. "So Madame Pomfrey has already taken care of your splendid black." He caught the girl blinking nervously, curling almost into a ball from tension, and immediately understood. "Oh, very well. Congratulations on your recovery, Miss Granger, then," Amasta said, turning his questioning gaze toward Lockhart. "Apologies for interrupting your conversation, Professor, if now is inconvenient." "Oh, no need to leave. I can't favor one fan over another, Amasta. Miss Granger came to express her thanks, and we've already finished talking." Amasta noticed the curiosity flickering in Hermione's eyes. She clearly misunderstood something, but he didn't bother correcting her. There was no harm in the slight confusion, and he stepped inside with a wry smile. Though curious why Breen had come to see Lockhart, Hermione knew they wouldn't allow her to linger and eavesdrop openly. Reluctantly, she began to leave, and in her preoccupied state, accidentally knocked over Lockhart's towering stack of hundreds of letters awaiting replies. "Sorry, Professor." "I'll help you." Watching Hermione fumble for her wand, Amasta shook his head amusedly. No matter how often he saw this clever young witch, she always looked flustered. "No need, Miss Granger. I'll take care of it," he said with a smile. Once Hermione scurried off, Amasta stepped forward. His gaze fell on a piece of aged parchment buried beneath the pile of letters. He paused for a moment, reading the text, but quickly composed himself. With a crisp snap of his fingers, the hundreds of letters, each in various envelopes, floated neatly back into place. "From where I stand, you might be the most popular teacher in this school right now. Professor Lockhart," he remarked. Lockhart, a little stiff from Amasta's silent, wandless spell, immediately beamed. "Not just that. Once you're fully integrated into the teaching staff, you'll see that Gilderoy Lockhart is also the most eye-catching among professors." After all, Lockhart winked playfully at Amasta and took a deep breath. How many can win the most charming smile from the Wizarding Weekly 5 times in a row, be a third-class member of the Order of Merlin, and an honorary member of the Anti-Dark Arts League? And of course, Amasta, I'm sure you and Miss Granger are already well acquainted with my illustrious past, aren't you? Lockhart didn't even notice Amasta's increasingly strained expression. completely lost in his own world. Oh, ha ha, Amasta, Amasta. I must admit, you've surprised me once again. Not only did you painstakingly follow in my footsteps to enter Hogwarts, but now you've even petitioned Dumbledore to become my assistant. Oh, I must say, among all my most devoted followers, you truly stand out. Amasta pressed his lips together, tension tightening his face. He began to understand why this world-famous author had earned the reputation of being universally disliked at Hogwarts. Yet it also gave him an idea of how to communicate with him. Ahem, indeed, Professor Lockhart. I am, without a doubt, an admirer of yours. Aha! Lockhart laughed dramatically, his expression a perfect mix of vindication and delight. Yes, exactly. I applied to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts assistant professor to be closer to you. I hope to grow alongside the students in your classroom. However, Professor McGonagall seems to think, well, she means that dealing with so much fan mail every day while teaching hundreds of young witches and wizards to fight dark magic must be exhausting. She wants me to share some of that burden by having me teach the upper years alone. Honestly, this wasn't exactly my initial intention. No need to explain, Amasta. I completely understand your meaning. Lockhart's confident grin seemed to radiate light. He cut him off. You wanted to teach alongside me, right? No problem, Amasta. Gilderoy Lockhart never refuses a request from a devoted fan. Um, Achieving his goal so easily left Amasta momentarily dumbfounded. At the end of this pleasant meeting, Amasta asked if he should prepare in advance to keep up with Lockhart's lessons, only to be told that no preparation was necessary, just follow instructions during class. Oh, and Professor Lockhart. Before leaving the office, Amasta paused at the door, his expression subtly nuanced. Do you have any experience with memory-related magic? Chapter 42, anticipated by all. As everyone at Hogwarts knew, if a secret was known to more than one student or professor, depending on its level of sensationalism, the news would spread within 1 to 3 days, reaching even Hagrid's dog, Fang. That evening, Harry, who hadn't left the common room all day except to use the bathroom, and had only eaten a few beef pasties Ron had brought, also heard the astonishing news. Mr. Brain is going to be our Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Is that true, Ron? In the Gryffindor common room, nearly everyone was discussing it. Limping slightly, Harry hurried past several excited older students and headed straight for the sofa where they usually held discussions. As he neared, he noticed that besides Ron and Neville, Seamus and Dean were also there. He's just the professor's assistant, Harry. Ron nudged Neville to make space for the tired Harry. This news first came from Hufflepuff. At first, I thought it was a joke, but on my way back after bringing you your lunch, I overheard Ravenclaw's Blot and Dupin talking about it in the hall. Apparently, Malfoy even went to confirm with Snape himself. Ron frowned, looking utterly baffled. Honestly, I still can't make sense of how this even happened. But isn't that a good thing? Neville offered his opinion cautiously. When he realized everyone was staring at him, he shrank back, his tone hesitant. I mean, he's an investigator. When it comes to dealing with dark magic, he should know a lot more than Lockhart. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance, but didn't respond. As for teaching ability, that was hard to judge. They hadn't really seen it. But in terms of dueling, based on Lockhart's performance in last year's dueling lessons, there was no way he could match Mr. Breen, even back in his first year. At that moment, the twins, who had just arrived, high-fived each other gleefully at the news, celebrating the fact that their great adventures were about to resume. Neville looked somewhat confused, but Harry and Ron understood what it meant. If Mr. Breen became the assistant professor for Defense Against the Dark Arts, he wouldn't be monitoring the magical surveillance every night. For Fred and George, that was like a cloud parting to reveal the sun. Bang! Hermione suddenly appeared, dropping several hefty books on the coffee table with a thud, nearly collapsing it. She squeezed past to stand next to Harry, forcing Neville to rise. Where have you been? I haven't seen you all day, Ron asked, frowning at her unusually cheerful mood. Where else, Ron? The library, of course. I've missed an entire month of classes, and I need to make up for lost time. Hermione rolled her eyes, clearly thinking his question was silly. By the way, what were you guys just talking about? About Mr. Breen becoming the assistant professor, Harry said cautiously. We were discussing why this is happening. Wasn't his purpose at Hogwarts to catch the heir of Slytherin? Why is he suddenly connected to this class? Maybe he's already quietly dealt with the heir, Siamis guessed, eyes wide. That guess didn't hold up. Anyone knew that if the investigator had truly solved the Chamber of Secrets, the school would have made a big announcement. Or maybe he's abandoned that plan. Think about it. Something even Dumbledore couldn't resolve, and some young wizard no one's heard of? How could he possibly handle it? Perhaps he just wants to earn some money before the headmaster kicks him out. From what I know, professors' salaries are quite generous. Dean offered this equally absurd theory. Dumbledore wasn't easily fooled, and if Amostar Brain truly had such a shameless motive, Dumbledore would have seen through it. At least Harry believed so. You think? Harry was relieved to see that at least in this group, no one still considered him the heir of Slytherin. He rubbed his numbed hip and spoke hesitantly, mostly to avoid angering Hermione. I've dealt with Mr. Breen once. He's a skilled wizard. If he chose to take on this class as a professor, maybe there's a chance. Hiss. Everyone but Hermione and Harry sucked in a sharp breath. Ron stared at Harry in terror, stammering, You're saying Kikir? That's his ability? Oh, Harry, I remember the first time you heard that. You're overestimating him, Harry. Dean was the first to voice opposition, his tone sharp. I don't see him having that kind of skill. Aside from a few die-hard fans, it was widely agreed among the younger wizards that Gilderoy Lockhart excelled at spinning tales and schmoozing. Being the heir of Slytherin was no easy feat, and Ron, who had always despised Lockhart, couldn't convince himself that the man had the ability to pull it off. I know. It's hard to believe, Harry admitted, uncertain of his own theory. But if it's just a disguise, like with Kettleburn, who fooled everyone at first, then maybe. Otherwise, I can't understand why Mr. Breen would take on such a thankless task. He's a Hogwarts student, too. Surely he knows being the professor of this class rarely ends well. I mean, maybe he's discovered a clue, but not. Harry trailed off, his voice drowned out by Hermione's loud, sharp cough. Everyone turned to Hermione, whose expression had shifted from pleased to grim, and Ron asked in surprise, What's your opinion, Hermione? Hermione glared at Ron with a flash of irritation before lifting her chin proudly. This morning, I went to Professor Lockhart's office. You went to Lockhart's office? Ron immediately cut her off. But don't you already have his signature? Are you asking for another one? Harry promptly nudged Ron with his foot, signaling him to shut up. It didn't matter whether Lockhart was suspicious, and it didn't matter why Hermione went to his office. What mattered was that for the next few years, he and Ron would rely on Hermione's help to complete their potions and history of magic homework. If they managed to completely anger her now, their future would be hopeless. Late at night, lying on the soft four-poster bed, Harry squinted his eyes. His mind was full of that murderous voice, his parcel tongue, Dobby's warning, and Malfoy's mention of the Chamber of Secrets being opened 50 years ago. He was probably the person in the school who thought about this the most. Unless the culprit was caught and the chamber incident fully resolved, he couldn't truly relax. But how is that even possible, Harry? Ron mumbled softly from beside him, turning over in bed. How could someone like Brain be a fan of Lockhart? To become his assistant just to get close to him? Hermione's idea is ridiculous. There's no way the things he writes in his books are real. No, I absolutely don't believe it. I don't know either, Ron. Harry shifted slightly, facing the window. He gazed at the brilliant starry sky, letting the drowsiness slowly pull at his consciousness. Before drifting fully to sleep, the overly youthful face of Mr. Brain flashed before his eyes. He recalled the handsome, gentle smile and pale purple eyes of that striking face, muttering, But at least we can look forward to this class. Still Running a Fever. Chapter 43. Lockhart's Teaching Methods, Part 1. By February, under the gentle spring breeze, the withered forest trees had begun to sprout fresh green buds. In the castle, the young witches and wizards were preparing for the 93rd year's Valentine's Day, amidst this season of life and renewal. For first and second years, still in their naive stage, Valentine's Day was just a holiday of unclear meaning. But for upper year students, the importance of the day was self-evident. On the first morning of February's first week, Hufflepuff's Cedric Diggory, egged on by his dorm friends, intercepted a pretty Chinese girl at the entrance to the Ravenclaw common room and presented her with a handmade singing Cupid card. Even the studious Percy couldn't resist a little mischief. During Professor McGonagall's transfiguration class, while everyone was distracted, he transformed a fire lizard into Penelope's likeness and grinned at her for several minutes. Dumbledore, unusually displaying his gentlemanly manners, had ordered a bouquet of flowers from Hogsmeade for every female staff member at Hogwarts. Inspired by this, Lockhart announced at lunch, cheerfully informing all the professors that he intended to compose a song of praise for every member of the school, and had come up with a brilliant way to present them on Valentine's Day. Amosta, is there any chance you could take care of this fool before that day arrives? After hearing Lockhart, Snape's face darkened, and in a low voice he asked sharply, "I'll do my best, Professor." Amosta chewed on a piece of smoked bacon and said wryly, "But why don't you make the potion yourself? You're a potions professor and a master in your own right. I'm sure you'd be skilled at this." After lunch, Amosta used the break to review the previous night's surveillance, but found nothing. On Monday afternoon, sixth-year Gryffindor and Slytherin students had 2 joint Defense Against the Dark Arts lessons. This would be Amosta's first time co-teaching with Lockhart. To show respect, he wore a brand new black wizard's robe and arrived in the classroom before anyone else. 10 minutes before 2 p.m., the sixth years began to trickle in. Though the news had spread when the students saw the investigating officer in their class, their faces lit up with surprise and excitement. Lockhart hadn't arrived yet. Only Amosta stood at the podium, smiling at the rowdy students, with Gryffindors and Slytherins clearly seated in separate sections. Most of these students had shared classes with Amosta before, but aside from a few, he remembered almost none of them. "Flint, I heard you're now captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team?" As Amosta spoke, the classroom seemed to freeze, all eyes focused on Marcus and Amosta. "Yes, sir. I mean, Professor Brain." Tall and broad-shouldered, Flint instinctively stood up. Facing a professor was one thing, but facing a professor who also carried the authority of an investigator felt very different. The usually rough-and-tumble Quidditch captain looked tense, and his tone was unusually formal. That happened just last year." Since it was his own house team, Amosta gave a nod of approval. "Then give it your all, Flint. I hope the Slytherin team achieves great things under your leadership." At that, the curious expressions of the Gryffindors in the classroom immediately cooled. Some of the die-hard Quidditch fans even shot looks of thinly veiled hatred. Oliver and Percy exchanged a glance before lowering their heads, pretending to read the already open copy of Travels with Trolls on their desks. Meanwhile, the Slytherin students beamed with pride at Amosta's encouragement. They instinctively assumed Professor Breen, like Professor Snape, took good care of his own. Marcus, being the first named, seemed almost overconfident. He shot a condescending glance at Oliver, then grinned slyly and spoke loudly. "Thank you for your support, Professor Breen. All of us in Slytherin are thrilled to have you as our assistant. We believe you'll be the best Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher in years. So, Professor, what are you planning to teach us?" Oliver Wood, hiding his head beneath the desk, made a discreet gagging face, and even Percy, normally the model student, didn't look particularly pleased. "Hey, thank you for your support as well, Flint." Amosta didn't bother calling out Marcus's little scheming. He smiled and nodded. "As you said, Flint, I'm only an assistant. The curriculum and teaching decisions are ultimately up to Professor Lockhart." Just then, Lockhart strode in dramatically. Today he wore a deep mauve robe. Amosta realized that in all their previous encounters, he'd never seen Lockhart wear the same color twice. "Writing books really makes that much money?" The thought flashed through Amosta's mind as he stepped forward to greet him. "Looks like you've already introduced yourself, haven't you, Professor Breen?" Lockhart's smile was dazzling as he clapped Amosta heavily on the shoulder, speaking as though to a cherished junior. "Just a brief greeting, Professor Lockhart." Amosta subtly moved his shoulder aside and smiled warmly. "Like the students, I'm looking forward to your lecture as well." "Oh dear, looks like it's a bunch of the same kind," someone whispered from the Gryffindor group. Amosta's expression twitched. He was certain Lockhart had heard it too, judging by the fleeting freeze of expression, but the professor quickly resumed his usual cheerful demeanor. So, Amasta, clueless about what was about to happen, blinked at the suddenly stifling atmosphere of the classroom. Where should we start, Professor Lockhart? Oh, no need to worry, Breen. The little ones know the drill. For the next 2 hours, Amasta finally witnessed Lockhart's uniquely special teaching style. He called roll and had students dramatically read long passages from his storybooks, insisting on expressive delivery. Lockhart stood at the podium, feigning oblivion to the students' pained expressions, looking utterly delighted. When their performance lacked emotion, he would step in and demonstrate himself, adding exaggerated and ridiculous gestures to enhance the classroom atmosphere, though no one paid him any mind. All Amasta could do was help maintain classroom order. You always teach them like this? During a short pause, while Lockhart caught his breath after a long passage describing uniformed trolls, Amasta strolled casually over, speaking gently. Aha! Eager to show off, right? Lockhart tapped his nose with a self-satisfied glint in his eyes, ignoring Amasta's explanation. He abruptly stopped Percy, who was reading in a dull, lifeless voice, and said loudly, The chance to shine is right in front of you, Breen. Let's see if you can seize it. He thrust the textbook into Amasta's hands and proclaimed to everyone with radiant enthusiasm, Watch how a true fanatic expresses the utmost admiration for Professor Lockhart with a voice full of passion. Snickers erupted. From the edge of the podium, Oliver Wood peeked at the befuddled investigator standing beside Lockhart and couldn't help but let out a suppressed laugh. Chapter 44, Lockhart's Teaching Methods, Part 2. After watching a group of excited young witches and wizards leave the classroom, Amasta felt a mixture of confusion, daze, and existential doubt. At least, he finally understood one thing, why neither Dumbledore nor Professor McGonagall could tolerate Lockhart's teaching methods. Maybe it's just an isolated case, he thought absently on his way back to his office, still slightly dazed from being forced to read half a book aloud. However, over the next few days, the cruel truth became unavoidable. Lockhart's teaching style was absurd to the extreme. How could Dumbledore hire someone so bizarre? On Thursday morning, as Amasta left the first-year classroom for lunch in the Great Hall, he couldn't help but feel sorry for the students. Back when he studied at Hogwarts, the defense against the dark arts professors also changed every year, and their skill levels varied. Yet at least those professors genuinely tried to teach. Lockhart, on the other hand, turned the subject into nothing more than a recital and performance class. Speaking of performances, that had been yesterday afternoon, his first time teaching Potter's Year. He had hoped Lockhart would hold back in front of the main character, but the result left him flabbergasted. For a full 2 hours, Amasta played the role of a grateful, naive villager from the Himalayas while Lockhart forced Potter to act as a snowman, with Lockhart himself directing the scene. Do something, Professor Brain. At the end of the lesson, Harry, nursing a bruised leg from being chased around by Lockhart, looked at him in despair. I'll be forever grateful to you. Ron covered his mouth to stifle laughter, but it quickly turned to pain when Hermione, carrying several of Lockhart's books, passed by and stomped hard on his foot. I thought your performance was truly outstanding, Professor Brain. Hermione glared at Ron, flushed, and then shot Amasta a quick comment before running off. Outstanding performance? Is that really the point, Miss Granger? Amasta watched the girl dash away, completely bewildered. Her opinion differs from ours, Professor Brain, Dean Thomas explained calmly. Hermione idolizes Lockhart. She's always tried to convince everyone that the ridiculous adventures in his books are true, but she's never had proof until now. She's finally found a fan of Lockhart in a professor, someone of real weight. Who? Amasta raised an eyebrow. You, Professor Brain. Harry quietly observed Amasta's expression and said carefully, Hermione told me she personally heard Lockhart say that you're his die-hard fan. Amasta rolled his eyes sky high and mentally reviewed Snape's earlier advice. At lunch, while Lockhart was busy blathering to the exasperated Professor Flitwick, McGonagall leaned over sternly and whispered to Amasta, Professor Brain, Hogwarts pays your salary not to have you follow him and recite for the students. Show your true abilities, Amasta. You promised me. Amasta put down his lemon meringue tart and scanned the bustling Great Hall. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was eyeing him in confusion, while a few Ravenclaw girls whispered and pointed, giggling and shaking their heads. Headmaster Dumbledore. Amasta blinked, his tone calm. Any advice for me, Amasta? Dumbledore, apparently uninvolved, shook his beard slightly and returned to his meticulous focus on a cauldron-shaped cake. If I wanted to offer Professor Lockhart a drink and accidentally added something extra, causing him to have to rest in bed for a while, would you mind? Snape, who had been staring down, finally lifted his gaze. A faint curve appeared at the corner of his mouth, and a glimmer of intelligence returned to his usually hollow eyes. Do you remember your first lesson with me in first year, Amasta? Daffodil root powder added to mugwort extract produces a highly potent sleeping potion, a life or death draught. Normally, it will leave someone in a dazed stupor in bed for a week, but if combined with high concentration alcohol and without proper treatment, it can leave the person in a confused, nearly incoherent state for 2 months. Amasta casually nodded towards Snape. You know, Professor Snape, my memory has always been rather sharp, so what do you think, Headmaster Dumbledore? Ahem, Amasta. At that moment, Dumbledore suddenly lifted his gaze and began examining the patterns on the chandeliers above the Great Hall. His piercing blue eyes seemed distant and unfocused. I am now 112 years old. The passage of time is truly formidable. Lately, I've noticed my legs and feet are no longer as nimble, my eyesight is failing, and my hearing isn't what it used to be. So, regarding the discussion you just had with Severus and Minerva, I didn't catch a single word. Professor McGonagall pressed her lips tightly together, a mixture of exasperation and irritation in her eyes, but Dumbledore didn't give her the chance to complain. He simply stood, addressed the group plotting against the well-known author and Hogwarts' defense against the dark arts professor, explained he was feeling fatigued and needed to rest in his office, and then departed. I'll have the items you need delivered to your office before 9 tonight. Snape also stood, his retreating figure betraying a certain impatience. Poppy. Under Amasta's pointed gaze, a slightly embarrassed and annoyed Professor McGonagall turned toward Madame Pomfrey, who was busy with her potions. If you have a moment tonight, could you come to my office? There's something I'd like to discuss with you privately. Oh, of course, Minerva. I'll be there on time. Madame Pomfrey, thinking her salary might be bumped up, beamed with delight as she agreed enthusiastically. Ahem, Professor Lockhart. After McGonagall left, the once crowded staff table was already half empty. Flitwick, seizing the moment while Amasta was speaking with Lockhart, dashed off with agility that still hinted at his dueling champion days. Aha, Amasta, try and get your Valentine's card early like Phileas, are you? Oh, this puts me in quite a predicament. But, actually, Amasta cut off Lockhart's long-winded preamble. During last year's second-year Defense Against the Dark Arts class, I heard from Miss Granger that your favorite birthday gift is a crate of Ogden's old fire whiskey. Well, as luck would have it, I happen to have a bottle over 80 years old, a gift from Headmaster Dumbledore. Might I have the honor of taking you for a drink at the Three Broomsticks this Saturday? Do you two have anything to add? At the Gryffindor table, Hermione, who had been craning her neck to eavesdrop on the professors, glanced at the flustered Harry and Ron and proudly lifted her chin. He's his fan. Chapter 45. My Letter. The first weekend of February dawned clear and bright. With Valentine's Day approaching, the school grounds were suddenly dotted with couples. On the lawns, by the Black Lake, and at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, older students paired off, oblivious to the whispers of younger students or the disapproving glances of professors. They pressed noses together, whispered in each other's ears, and paid no mind to whether their displays were appropriate. Disgraceful. Why aren't the prefects or professors doing anything? Hermione, having gotten an early start on her way to the library, had already spotted 5 or 6 such couples and fumed as she passed by. The library that day was quieter than usual. Aside from the strict Madame Pince, deeply engrossed in a gilded volume in her usual spot, the long, narrow aisles between hundreds of bookshelves held only a dozen or so upper-year students preparing for their upcoming OWLs and NWTs. Yet none of this distracted Hermione. She weaved swiftly and efficiently between the shelves, seeking out exactly the books she needed. Ah, found it! Hermione paused in front of a bookshelf lined with dozens of large, worn tomes. She leapt up and pulled down a copy of Forgotten Ancient Magic and Curses from the top shelf. Leaning against the back of the shelf, she began poring over the dense, intricate text, hoping to find some clue to explain what had petrified Colin and Justin. Since Fred and George had disappeared without a word, Wood had no choice but to announce, in frustration, that today's training session was canceled. This gave Harry, who had gotten up early for practice, a rare relaxing weekend. He had intended to accompany Hermione in searching for clues, but just before leaving, Ron grabbed him. "Look, Harry, Wood's finally giving you a break." Ron puffed his cheeks while shoving a small piece of roasted sausage into Scabbers' mouth. "Don't waste your precious weekend on something so uncertain. Come on, Simo got a new set of gobstones. We can borrow them and kill some time." Persuaded with ease, Harry gave in, leaving Hermione alone to search the library for any trace of the attack among the vast seas of knowledge and rivers of history. Sunlight streamed through the dust in the air and the gaps between the shelves, casting shifting, surreal patterns on Hermione's young, earnest face. As time passed, the stacks of books beside her grew higher and higher, nearly reaching above her slender shoulders. Amasta, walking past from the restricted section, watched silently for a moment. Somehow, a small ripple of emotion stirred within him. It was as if he saw a reflection of his younger self in Hermione. "Miss Granger." "Ah, Professor Brain." Immersed in her reading, Hermione turned around in surprise. Seeing Amasta approaching with a gentle smile, she quickly closed the books in her arms, slightly flustered as she straightened up. "Sorry, Professor, I didn't notice you here." Aside from that awkward first meeting in the infirmary over the Christmas break, this was the first time Hermione had met Professor Brain in a private setting. Amasta glanced at the nervous young witch, clutching her books, and understood immediately. He nodded toward her and asked gently, "Are you looking for clues about the Chamber of Secrets?" Receiving a confident affirmation, he surveyed the room and asked with surprise, "Just you, Miss Granger? Where are your friends, Potter and Mr. Weasley? Didn't they come to help?" "Oh, them!" The small witch, hair in disarray, bristled indignantly. She was about to complain about Harry and Ron, but the words turned into an explanation. Harry had gone for Quidditch practice. Ron was in the common room working on his herbology homework, and only she had finished her assignments early, leaving her free to wander the library. "Ha ha!" Even without legitimacy, Amasta could tell it was a lie, yet he didn't expose her. Instead, he nodded understandingly. "The strong often walk alone, Miss Granger. Keep it up." With that cryptic comment, he turned and left. Long after his figure had disappeared around the corner of the shelves, Hermione remained, staring after him. She couldn't shake the strange weight of his words, yet somehow she felt invigorated. Her arms, sore from holding the books all morning, no longer ached, and her amber eyes regained their usual brightness. "Come on, Hermione," she whispered to herself, clenching her fists. With renewed determination, she returned to the bookshelves. Amasta strolled through the bustling streets of Hogsmeade. Perhaps due to his new role, many young witches and wizards greeted him, and he nodded kindly in return. Suddenly, a short distance ahead, two small figures cloaked in black caught his attention. Frowning briefly, he decided to deviate from his original path and followed them into a secluded alley. He trailed them to the three broomsticks, but did not enter. Instead, he waited outside, a faint smirk playing on his lips. As expected, within minutes, the bar erupted with the booming voice of the irritable proprietor. The two cloaked figures staggered out, unprepared to meet someone waiting 20 feet away, smirking and watching them intently. Embarrassment, fear, and helplessness tore through the hearts of the two black-cloaked men. They trembled at the bar's doorway, awaiting the inevitable punishment. "No, bro, he can't even make out our faces!" The man on the right suddenly snapped to attention. He lowered his voice and tugged at his companion's sleeve. The reminder was enough. His partner immediately understood. From under the black robe on the left came a hoarse, heavy cough. "Cough, cough. Mind your own business, kid. We don't blink when we kill." "Damn it!" Amasta glared after the two quickly fleeing Weasley kids, his face dark with irritation. He resolved to find a chance to teach them a lesson. Turning, he hadn't gone far when, in a tea house filled with mist and decorated from ceiling to floor with frills and ribbons, He spotted Percy Weasley passionately kissing his Ravenclaw prefect girlfriend under the golden cherub chandelier. This family, truly top-tier wizards. Amasta turned his head, pretending not to see, and briskly walked toward the three broomsticks. By evening, Hermione recounted to a listless Harry and Ron what Professor Breen had said earlier in the library, but unfortunately, neither Harry nor Ron could make sense of it. Still, Ron wrinkled his nose and gestured vaguely with his arms midair. Sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? Imagine, oh, I mean you, Harry. During the Quidditch final, Gryffindor trailing Slytherin 140, everyone has given up, and then right before Dorian Puce scores the winning goal, you catch the golden snitch right in front of Malfoy and drop a line like that. I bet Malfoy wouldn't eat for a year, Harry. If that were the case, Ron, I'd be more than happy to help Malfoy eat a year's worth of meals in a single day. Harry chuckled, imagining exactly the scene Ron described. Hermione rolled her eyes at the two of them. Just as she was about to scold them, a ruckus erupted from the entrance hall. A large group rushed in, chasing something at breakneck speed. Harry and Ron froze, their smiles gone, and Hermione immediately sensed something was amiss. She dropped her food and dashed forward to investigate. On the marble stairs, Headmaster Dumbledore stormed down with several professors, faces serious. In moments, he dispersed the crowd and guided Amasta, who was riding along with Lockhart, up the staircase. The Slytherin heir was on the move again. Harry's previously cheerful mood sank like ice water. He immediately feared the worst and exchanged a worried glance with pale-faced Ron before they hurried after them. At the hospital wing, Lockhart no longer had his usual suave demeanor. His hair was disheveled, his bloodshot eyes wide, and he emitted frantic, strained groans as if desperate to speak. Madame Pomfrey was examining him, her stern expression indicating serious concern. Dumbledore, ever reasonable, allowed students to come see Lockhart. Outside the curtains, they exchanged anxious glances. Hermione squeezed to the front and, seeing Lockhart in such a pitiful state, suddenly covered her mouth and sobbed quietly. Amasta felt a pang of guilt, wondering if he had taken things too far. But when he noticed Snape standing in the shadows, seemingly suppressing a laugh, his mood steadied. "How is he, Poppy?" Dumbledore stood at Lockhart's bedside, keeping his expression hidden, but his voice sounded heavy. "Very bad, Headmaster." Madame Pomfrey cast a quick glance at McGonagall's stern face and explained to everyone. "Severe alcohol allergy, Headmaster. He's likely to be bedridden through Easter. Hasn't anyone realized Professor Lockhart is terrible with alcoholic drinks?" Lockhart's most desired birthday gift wasn't a crate of Ogden's aged fire whiskey? Hermione, eyes brimming with tears, looked up blankly at Pomfrey's assessment. "It's all my fault, Headmaster Dumbledore." Amasta stepped forward, wearing a look of sorrow. "I didn't clarify the situation before inviting Professor Lockhart to drink. He probably agreed only out of politeness. I'm truly ashamed. If you allow it, I can resign immediately." No, that won't do." Before McGonagall could step forward, to everyone's surprise, Lockhart, barely clinging to life, mustered the strength to speak. He shakily, waveringly stretched out a hand toward Amasta and murmured faintly, See, letter?" "What did you say, Professor Lockhart? Do you have something to entrust?" Amasta immediately stepped forward, gently pushing Dumbledore aside, half crouching at the bedside to hold Lockhart's hand, the other hand hidden in his sleeve, ready to cast a protective spell. Granger?" Unexpectedly, at that moment, Lockhart suddenly called Hermione's name. Amasta's eyebrows twitched, but in the end, he obeyed Lockhart's request and summoned Hermione to the bedside as well. "I'm here, Professor. What would you like me to do?" Tears streamed down Hermione's cheeks, and her voice trembled with sorrow. "What do you need me to do, Professor?" You fans, both of you." Lockhart's face was ashen, each word spat out with effort. "Help me write my replies." Chapter 46, Professor Brain's First Lesson, Part 1. On Monday morning, hardly anyone paid attention during Charms and Herbology. Everyone was quietly discussing what had happened on Saturday. Even Hermione, normally so focused in class, looked pale and listless. By lunchtime, no one could definitively answer whether Professor Lockhart's reaction had been due to alcohol intolerance or a poisoned drink. This afternoon, the second lesson, first and second years from all four houses will have Defense Against the Dark Arts in the Great Hall. The prefects hurriedly descended from the teacher's table, passing the shocking news to the lower year students who were whispering among themselves. Why? Ron, confused, asked Percy, who confirmed that, to the best of his knowledge, the second lesson in the afternoon was supposed to be history of magic. Professor McGonagall said so, Ron. If you have questions, you can ask her yourself. After replying, Percy hurried past Harry and the others to inform Ginny and the rest near the entrance. By the time Harry and the others, exhausted from transfiguration, arrived at the Great Hall, the space had been transformed. A circular platform had been set up in the center, surrounded by nearly 160 to 170 desks. Most first and second year students from the other three houses had already gathered. Everyone chattered excitedly about this unusual class setup and speculated about what Professor Brain would teach them. This reminds me of bad memories, Harry muttered. I just hope this isn't going to turn into a full-blown stage play. Gradually, the crowded desks filled with students from all four houses. When the last empty desk was occupied, Amostar Brain finally appeared under the gaze of hundreds of eager eyes. He descended the marble staircase, leapt over the crowd, and nimbly jumped onto the platform, finally standing at the center with a smile, surveying the gathered students. His first words sent the quiet hall into an uproar. Now, everyone, put all Lockhart's books back in your bags. You won't be needing them in my class. Woohoo! Cedric Macmillan of Hufflepuff shouted first, and his cry acted like an avalanche signal. For several minutes, cheers and whoops erupted from all directions, shaking even the chandeliers overhead. Can you believe it? I've been waiting for this for half a year! Dean flung his copy of Break Up with the Banshee into his bag and laughed joyfully. Ron seemed about to join in, but Harry grabbed his arm and subtly nodded toward Hermione, whose expression betrayed her shock. Both restrained their excitement and put their books away. The cacophony of cheers continued for several minutes until Amostar cleared his throat loudly, gradually bringing silence back to the hall. Now, I think I owe you all an explanation. Amostar smiled and nodded toward the students below. I imagine you're all curious why I chose to teach in this manner. He cleared his throat and continued. Defense Against the Dark Arts has long suffered from frequent professor changes, which has affected the quality of instruction here at Hogwarts. In fact, my own tenure as your professor may not be very long. So, in order to give you real, practical defensive skills within a limited time, I have made a few adjustments. Professor Brain! Before he could continue, Seamus raised his hand eagerly. Introduce yourself, Professor. Of course, we know you were sent by the board to investigate the Chamber of Secrets, but what did you do before that? That's an interesting question, Mr. Finnegan. Amostar scratched his head, gazing down at the dozens of curious eyes, then raised an eyebrow and said, Well, before coming to Hogwarts, I was more or less a freelancer. I ran errands, gathered potion ingredients, delivered goods, that sort of thing. Heh, just a little-known nobody, not even close to being famous like Professor Lockhart. I don't buy that for a second, Ron muttered to Harry, who nodded in agreement. Amostar's perfunctory self-introduction didn't satisfy the students, and the atmosphere cooled slightly. Everyone was waiting to see what Professor Brain would say next. I suppose you're all wondering what I'm going to teach you? Amostar spoke again, and under the calm confidence of his voice, the young witches and wizards gradually fell silent, their eyes fixed eagerly on him. But, he continued, smiling as he surveyed the crowd, I'd like to turn that question back to you. What is it you hope to learn from me? Powerful spells. Blaise Zabini, a second-year Slytherin, immediately raised his hand and said loudly, I want to learn spells of great power, Professor Breen, because I believe only strong magic can withstand dangerous and extraordinary dark arts. Zabini's answer won the approval of his classmates. Even the Gryffindors, who usually sneered at Slytherins, hesitated and nodded in agreement. Though your understanding of resisting dark magic isn't particularly deep, it's still a decent answer, Mr. Zabini. Amostar nodded approvingly. Then, lowering his voice slightly as he scanned the circle of students, he continued, Since you are all so interested in powerful spells, let's start there. Now, who can tell me which type of spell can truly be called immensely powerful? The question was unusual. The students exchanged puzzled glances, unsure how to respond. Many turned to Hermione, and as expected, she didn't disappoint. Under all eyes, she raised her hand and stood up. If I understand your question correctly, Hermione drew a deep breath, entering her stride, and answered, if we're talking about type of spells, then it should be the ancient magic, most of which has been lost to time. Can you explain why, Miss Granger? Amasta asked, intrigued, fixing her with a steady gaze. Ancient magic, Hermione began, is famed for its immense power. Narrowly speaking, it refers to the spells created by early wizards from the tribal era up to roughly 800 years ago. Back then, the natural environment was harsh, and many dangerous magical creatures that are now extinct were still active. To defend against these threats, highly intelligent ancient wizards developed spells with maximum potency as their main goal. However, as Muggle and wizarding civilizations advanced, humans began to tame nature, and the role of magic gradually shifted from survival to daily convenience. At the same time, advances in wand lore and the compatibility of modern magic made casting simpler, which in turn caused the most potent but complex, esoteric, and highly mana-demanding ancient magic to be abandoned by mainstream wizarding society until it was lost entirely. Excellent, Miss Granger. Amasta clapped enthusiastically. I don't think anyone would object if I gave Gryffindor 10 extra points. Hermione beamed as she sat down, while Ron looked at Professor Breen with hopeful eyes. Professor Breen, do you mean you're going to teach us those mysterious ancient spells? Chapter 47, Professor Breen's First Lesson, Part 2. Facing Ron's eager gaze, Amasta smiled but didn't answer directly. Instead, he steered the topic back to the lesson. Defense against the dark arts, though I personally prefer to call it dangerous defense, is a comprehensive course. The spells, transfiguration, herbology, potions, and even care of magical creatures that you study at this school all have applications here. To respond effectively to any threat, you must develop 3 qualities: skill, method, and courage. Attending a proper defense against the dark arts lesson at Hogwarts was rare. Even those young witches and wizards who normally paid little attention now focused on Professor Breen on the dais. Yet, only Hermione took meticulous notes, recording every word. Amasta then turned to Ron with a smile. I won't be teaching you immensely powerful ancient magic, Mr. Weasley. Seeing Ron's disappointed expression, he addressed the class. And here's why. First, I am not a charms professor. Teaching spells is Professor Flitwick's domain, not mine. Second, there was a time when I was fascinated by the power of ancient magic. But as my research deepened, I realized that nearly all of it has vanished into the river of time. Even if I devoted my entire life to it, I could never reconstruct a complete system of ancient magic. So I am not an expert in authentic ancient magic myself. Amasta paced to the other side of the dais and addressed Blazabini, who had wanted to learn powerful spells. My specialty lies in optimizing modern spells. By refining the spell's structure, I can elevate its power to approach the level of ancient magic, while keeping the spell's complexity manageable. Perhaps the concept was too advanced. Most of the students looked bewildered, clearly struggling to grasp what he meant. Seeing this, Amasta paused for a moment, preparing to do a demonstration. He drew his wand, and the students immediately perked up. This was their favorite part of class. Very well, Amasta said, eyes sweeping across the room. Let's do a demonstration. Who can tell me a spell that you are most confident with? A buzz erupted through the great hall. The excited chatter of the young wizards sounded like thousands of bees taking flight. Leg locker curse, Professor Brain. I'm good at this. Lavender Brown from Gryffindor eagerly raised her hand. Bat bogey hex. Pale-faced Ginny timidly raised hers, but her voice was completely drowned out by the noise, and Amasta didn't hear her at all. Professor Brain, I'll say 1. Malfoy sneered at Harry, standing up and shouting loudly, Tarantalegra! Crabbe and Goyle immediately doubled over in laughter, while Harry stood his ground, glaring at Malfoy, shouting the incantation with impressive skill. The students eagerly called out spells, some silly, some practical, toothache curse, hair loss hex, tongue-tying curse, and so on. Amasta tilted his head and listened for a while, growing increasingly perplexed. Every spell touched a blind spot in his knowledge. Wait, Amasta shouted, clearly frustrated. Cough, cough! Does no one know a proper spell? The students fell silent, exchanging glances. Finally, Ron timidly raised his hand. Levitation charm, Professor Brain. I think I'm fairly good at this one. Very good, Mr. Weasley. Relieved to hear a familiar spell, Amasta strode over to Ron, encouraging him with a smile. Let's show everyone your levitation charm, Mr. Weasley. Ron's face immediately flushed red. He stammered nervously, and Harry and Hermione quickly realized what he was worried about. They began babbling explanations for him. Is your wand broken? Amasta raised an eyebrow. May I take a look? When Ron produced his wand, held together with magical tape to prevent it from snapping completely, Malfoy burst out laughing. Choose someone else, Professor Brain. Weasley's wand could kill everyone here. The Slytherins erupted in laughter, which only added to Ron's pressure. His face and ears turned crimson, as if scalded. I don't see what's so funny, Mr. Malfoy. Mocking others doesn't make you witty, Amasta said calmly, turning his gaze toward them. The Slytherins felt as if they'd been doused with icy water, silent and frozen. Even Draco closed his mouth obediently. Can you fix it, Professor Brain? Harry, Ron, and Hermione watched gratefully as Amasta examined the broken wand. Ron asked with hopeful eyes. Amasta didn't answer immediately. He crouched, placing Ron's wand on the floor, eyes glimmering, and intoned, restored to its original state. The broken wand shook violently, sparks flying from the break, before magically fusing back together. You fixed it, Professor Brain. Ron's eyes shone with awe. I asked so many people, and they all told me this wand was completely ruined. They weren't wrong, Mr. Weasley, Amasta said, studying the wand carefully. After a moment, he smiled. A wand is a very delicate alchemical tool. While I've forced it back into shape using magic, the internal damage still remains. You can use it for now, but it won't last long. I recommend getting a new wand from Ollivander over the summer. Despite this warning, Ron looked thrilled. Wingardium Leviosa! The demonstration began. Performing a spell in front of so many eyes was a first for Ron, but with the encouragement of Professor Brain, Harry, and Hermione, he gained confidence. After a few nervous attempts, Ron successfully levitated the feather that Professor Brain conjured, making it float and sway gracefully in midair. Very good, Mr. Weasley. A successful levitation charm. Amasta clapped with a smile. Now try channeling more magical power into it. Many of the students looked surprised. They remembered Professor Flitwick explicitly warning them to control the power output when casting this charm, or else, bang! A sudden explosive sound erupted, and feathers from the spell burst into a swirling cloud, showering Ron, who had no idea what had happened, in a flurry of fluffy debris. Well done, Mr. Weasley. 2 points for Gryffindor. Now let me show you my version. After letting Ron step aside and acknowledging the gazes of all the young witches and wizards, Amasta slowly raised his arm. With a low, commanding shout, his wrist flicked with a sudden vibration. Careti Leviosa. Clang! The fragile, limp feathers instantly resonated with a crisp metallic ring, as though transformed into unbreakable blades. Now let me show you what my levitation charm can do. Amasta raised his arm high, and a streak of white light shot forward like cold lightning, hurtling toward a massive, intricately designed metal chandelier hanging above the hall, its weight easily over 1,000 pounds. Whoosh! A blast of wind swept through the great hall. The white light darted around the chandelier's frame, inside and out, before returning to Professor Breen's palm as if nothing had happened. Buzz! Clang! Professor, run! The chandelier's coming down! Hannah Abbott, a Hufflepuff, was the first to tear her gaze away in horror. Her shrill warning set the entire class scattering for the exits, all the while screaming in alarm at Amasta. Amused by the chaotic scene, Amasta laughed. Just as the heavy metal frame seemed ready to crush him into a pancake, he calmly flicked his wand again. In a moment that seemed to reverse time itself, the chandelier reassembled midair and neatly rehung itself from the ceiling. Powerful spells are all around us, Mr. Zabini, Amasta said as he stepped gracefully to the edge of the dais. He looked down at Blaise, who was pinned under Crabbe and struggling, and smiled gently. Now, do you understand the principle? Chapter 48, Professor Breen's First Lesson, Part 3. Thursday morning's second class was a combined defense against the dark arts lesson for 5th, 6th, and 7th years, still held in the Great Hall. For these older students, who had already received some defense training and were nearing graduation, Amasta had something special to impart. The foundation of defense is power equivalence. Defense only works when the opponent's strength is equal to or close to yours. For example, Even if I shared all the knowledge I have on dueling and defense, you wouldn't last more than 3 seconds against Headmaster Dumbledore. A burst of laughter erupted from the senior students. Penelope Clearwater, Ravenclaw prefect and Percy Weasley's girlfriend, raised her hand curiously. Then, Professor Breen, could you defeat Headmaster Dumbledore yourself? Don't ask such an embarrassing question.